Clara's body was almost mistaken for a fallen branch, curled beneath a veil of snow at the base of an old pine. Jeb Caldwell's stallion reared when it caught her scent, and that's what made him look. He swung down fast, boots crunching into the frozen earth, heart slamming as he saw her face. Young, bruised, lips blue from cold but not yet lifeless. She couldn't have been more than 20, though her torn dress and bloodied legs told a story of miles walked through hell. Her skin felt like ice when he touched her cheek, but there was breath. Shallow, desperate, but there. "Stay with me," Jeb muttered, wrapping her in his coat, pressing her against his chest. She didn't speak, didn't move. But when his gloved hand brushed a silver chain buried beneath her collarbone, her body jerked slightly. He tugged it free, revealing a locket, delicate, feminine, expensive. Inside was a folded scrap of paper, ruined by snow and time. But one word still screamed through the smudged ink: Vanderholt. Jeb's breath turned to steam. That name hadn't echoed through these woods in 7 years, not since the Vanderholt family's private train derailed in fire and mystery. They were declared dead, all of them, especially the heiress, who would have been just Clara's age by now. He stared down at her again, pale, fragile, and holding a secret the world thought buried. "Hell no," Jeb whispered. "You're not dying here." He hoisted her into the saddle, mounting behind her, holding her limp form upright as his horse galloped toward Caldwell Ranch. No one questioned Jeb Caldwell, not the men who feared him, not the bankers who envied him, not the women who whispered his name like a curse. But as the cold wind sliced across his face and Clara's head rested against his shoulder, something cracked open in him. Something old. Something dangerous. He didn't know who she was, ghost, con, or the last survivor of a forgotten bloodline. But whoever Clara Vanderholt turned out to be, Jeb knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just a girl lost in the woods. She was the key to something much bigger. And now, she was under his roof. That meant whatever storm was coming, he was already in its path. Clara opened her eyes to flickering lantern light, and the warmth of wool blankets pulled tight around her. For a moment, she thought she'd died, and this was heaven, until she turned her head and saw the hard stare of the man beside her bed. Jeb Caldwell sat like a statue, arms crossed, revolver on the table behind him. "You know who you are?" he asked, voice low, rough. Clara blinked slowly, her lips chapped. "Yes." "Then say it." Her throat burned as she whispered, "Clara Vanderholt." His jaw tightened, confirming what he already suspected. "You were supposed to be dead." Clara tried to sit up, pain surging through her side. "Everyone was," she rasped. "They made sure of it." Jeb leaned forward, his face inches from hers, his expression unreadable. "You tell me who they are, right now." But Clara only shook her head. "Too many ears, too many hands paid to stay quiet." She coughed, curling slightly. "You shouldn't have brought me here. You'd be dead if I hadn't." "I still might be." Jeb stood, pacing. He was a man who built walls around everything, his land, his business, his heart. But this girl had slipped through them like smoke. He'd saved lives before, on battlefields, in stampedes, even from outlaws, but never someone whose very name could reignite war among men in suits. "There's a price on you, isn't there?" he asked. Not officially. "Which makes it worse," Jeb muttered. Clara forced herself upright, every rib screaming. "You don't understand. My family was silenced because they refused to sign over what the banks wanted. A land deed. My father hid the last copy. I'm the only one who knows where." Jeb's boots echoed as he walked to the window. The snowy plains stretched wide. "Why tell me?" "Because I saw your name in the old journals. Caldwell Ranch. The only one that didn't fold when the others did. She looked at him, gaze steady despite her pain. You're the last honest man left. Jeb scoffed, but something in his eyes betrayed the sting. If that's true, he said slowly, then you're putting a target on both our backs. It was already there, Clara whispered. Now I just want to live long enough to finish what my father died for. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, two names no one dared speak had just formed an alliance, and that made them dangerous. Jeb didn't trust Easy, but there was something about the way Clara moved. Slow, cautious, like someone who had learned to live in shadows too long, that made him believe she wasn't lying. The next morning, he led her to the attic above the east wing of the ranch house, a place untouched since his own father died. Dust lay thick across trunks and crates of forgotten lives. You said your father left something behind, Jeb said. Show me. Clara's fingers trembled as she opened a leather satchel from her childhood, buried deep in the folds of her memory. Inside was a Bible. At first glance, nothing seemed odd, until she peeled back the false bottom and pulled out a folded sheet of vellum. That's it, she whispered. Jeb unrolled it on the floor. It wasn't a land deed. It was a map. What am I looking at? Coordinates, she said, to a piece of land that connects all 5 railroad lines. Whoever owns that land controls everything. Freight, passengers, commerce. Jeb's eyes narrowed. And your father wouldn't sell. He said it belonged to the people, Clara said, tears threatening. Said once you sell your land, you sell your soul. Jeb respected that. Too many ranchers had lost their souls to banks in polished boots. But this was a blueprint for war. They'll kill you for this, he said. They already tried. She looked at him, defiant. And now they'll come for you too. Jeb tucked the map inside his coat. Then let them. He led her downstairs, calling for his men. No one leaves this ranch, not without my word. Anyone asks, the girl's a cousin from Colorado, sick and resting. His foreman nodded, eyes flicking curiously toward Clara. But none questioned him. No one ever did. That night, Clara sat by the fire while Jeb stood watch at the window. She looked so small in his world, this house of iron, wood, and blood. But she carried something that couldn't be measured in weight. Truth. And Jeb had spent too long surrounded by liars to let that go. Do you believe me? She asked softly. Jeb didn't turn. I believe we've both got ghosts trying to kill us. Only difference is, yours have names. And he planned to learn every single one of them. Clara woke to gunfire. Not far off. Close. Ranch gates. Windows shattered as Jeb yanked her off the sofa and shoved her toward the cellar door. They found us, he growled, loading his revolver. Stay down. Don't make a sound. She wanted to argue, to fight beside him, but the way his jaw clenched made it clear. This wasn't a discussion. She slipped into the shadows just as the front door splintered. Jeb met the first intruder with a bullet to the leg. Another followed. Black coat, bowler hat, a U.S. Marshal's badge glinting in the dim light. You're harboring federal property, he shouted. Jeb fired back. Last I checked, people ain't property. More men stormed the porch. Horses screamed. The ranch hands, loyal, seasoned, fired from the outposts, forcing the attackers to scatter behind barrels and wagons. Clara stayed hidden, heart thudding. Through the floorboards, she could hear their boots thump and voices bark orders. Find the girl, Vanderholt's daughter. So they knew. And that meant this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about erasure. She gripped a kitchen knife she'd taken before hiding, breath held. When one of the intruders stepped into the kitchen, she didn't wait. She leapt from the shadows and slashed across his arm. He cursed, grabbing her wrist, but Jeb appeared in the doorway, gun raised. "Let her go." The man did, but not before Clara wrenched free with fire in her eyes. Jeb grabbed her and pulled her toward the back door. "They'll regroup. We ride, now." They mounted his horse, galloping into the timberline as the ranch behind them burned at the edges. Jeb didn't look back. "I knew they'd come," Clara said, gripping his waist. "I didn't think it would cost you everything." "You didn't cost me anything," he muttered. They did. They rode until dusk, stopping by a creek miles into the woods. As Jeb checked their supplies, Clara looked up at him. "You didn't have to save me again." "You didn't have to fight for your life with a butter knife either," he replied. She laughed for the first time in days, sharp, tired, but real. He turned to her, quiet. "You still have that map?" She nodded. "Then we're not finished." Beneath the stars, they camped beside cold firewood, fugitives marked by names too powerful to die quietly. But now it wasn't just Clara's burden, it was theirs. By the third day in hiding, Clara's fever had returned. Jeb built a fire beneath a natural stone arch by the river and soaked cloth in cold water. "You should have told me you were wounded," he muttered. Clara winced as he peeled back the makeshift bandage on her ribs. "Didn't want you to think I was a burden?" "You're not." He said it too quickly, too fiercely, and then looked away. As she rested, he studied the map again, tracing the points Clara had memorized. "You sure this is the place? There's an old watermill near the Black Ridge. That's where he hid the deed." Jeb folded the map. "Then we ride at first light." Clara reached for his hand, her skin pale and trembling. "You've lost everything because of me." He didn't pull away. I lost everything a long time ago when I stopped believing there were things worth burning down walls for." She smiled faintly. "And now? Now I'd burn a whole state to see you live free." Morning came with mist curling through the trees, and they followed the river upstream, traveling light and quiet. By midday, they reached the ruins of the mill. Burnt wood, collapsed beams, vines choking what was once industry. "There," Clara said, pointing to a stone cross embedded in the ground. Jeb pried it loose, revealing a sealed tin cylinder buried deep in earth. Inside was the deed, real, notarized, sealed with her father's crest. It declared Clara Vanderholt as sole heir to over 6,000 acres of strategic land. "This is everything," Jeb whispered. Clara nodded, tears welling. "And now we run." But she was wrong. A rifle cracked from the ridge. The tin can exploded in Jeb's hands. He tackled Clara to the ground as bullets rained. "They followed us," she screamed. "No, they were already here," Jeb growled, pulling her into the mill's cellar. He pressed the deed to her chest. "You carry that no matter what. You get out, you live." Clara shook her head. "Not without you." Jeb leaned close, voice low and urgent. "They can kill me, but not the truth. You carry both now." Her hands clenched the paper. "If you die, they win." He looked into her eyes. "Then let's make damn sure neither of us dies today." And outside, the battle for the truth began. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls as Jeb and Clara fought their way through splinters of the crumbling mill. The men hunting them weren't just bounty chasers. They were professionals, sent by men in high offices who had everything to lose if Clara survived. "There's too many," Clara gasped, clutching the deed against her chest as bullets tore through the rotting floorboards above them. Jeb reloaded with calm precision, jaw clenched. "Then we give them a story they can't erase." He moved fast, dragging old barrels across the exit tunnel, stuffing them with dried wood and oil-soaked cloth. Clara watched, realization dawning. You're going to trap them inside. Not all of them, he said grimly, but enough to buy us a road home. Jeb, no time. He lit the fuse and pulled her through the rear shaft just as fire raced down the line. The explosion shattered the hillside. Screams rang out. The mill collapsed in a rain of smoke and timber, burying the truth's pursuers under a storm of their own making. They didn't stop running until nightfall. Blood streaked Jeb's shoulder, and Clara's hands were raw, but they had the deed. And now they had something more dangerous: momentum. Where to now? Clara asked as they rested near an outcrop. My brother, Jeb said, wincing. Judge out of Carson. He's got the reach to get this deed registered before the vultures circle again. Clara looked at him, doubt flickering. You trust him? No, Jeb admitted, but I trust what this deed represents. Hope? Power, he said. The kind that can't be bought, only earned. She nodded slowly. Then let's give it back to the right people. He looked at her through the firelight. You're not just surviving anymore. Neither are you. Jeb studied her for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, I meant to stay alone. Meant to never need anyone again. And now? She whispered. He reached across the fire and took her hand. Now I know the truth was never just a paper in a box. It was you. They sat in silence as the stars pressed close, the world finally quiet around them. Behind them, a dozen men had failed to bury the past. Ahead of them, a new reckoning was coming. But for the first time, they weren't just running. They were rising. Carson City smelled like ink and gunpowder, and the air inside the courthouse was thick with tension. Jeb's brother, Judge William Caldwell, stood at the front of the dusty chamber, staring down at the deed like it was a lit match. You realize this makes you a target? He asked, adjusting his spectacles. We already are, Jeb said, and I'm done running. Clara stood at his side, her dress mended but modest, her eyes unflinching. My father's name was torn from every ledger. But this deed proves the truth. I won't hide any more. The judge sighed. I'll enter it into record, but there will be pushback. They'll come for both of you harder now. Let them, Jeb said coldly. We'll be ready. The judge stamped the document, his seal landing like thunder. It's legal. It's done. That evening, word spread. Clara Vanderholt had returned. And not just returned, but won. Newspapers whispered her name. Ranchers began gathering in taverns, some offering support, others preparing sabotage. You're stirring a hornet's nest, Jeb told her that night as they walked the edge of town. Good, she replied. Maybe it's time the nest burned. They stayed at a safe house on the edge of the valley, one Jeb used during border disputes. There, Clara opened her father's journal and began copying names: investors, lawmakers, rail barons who had tried to erase her family. We exposed them, she said, piece by piece. That'll paint you with a target bigger than a barn door. I'm not scared anymore. Jeb watched her. This girl who had once been a whisper in the snow. Now she was a force. You're not just a survivor, he said. You're a reckoning. She looked up, smile soft. And you're not just a rancher. You're the man who made me believe again. In what? In men who still fight for something besides gold. They sat under the stars again, but the stillness this time held purpose. No longer fugitives, no longer silenced. What happens when they come knocking again? She asked. Jeb reached for his revolver. They'll find the wrong door. Clara laid her hand over his. They'll find a woman who remembers every name they tried to bury. And now she was ready to speak them all. The threats came first. Unsigned notes slipped under doors, bribes offered in public, warnings masked as concern. Clara read each one and burned them in Jeb's fireplace. "They want me to vanish again," she said. "They're afraid of the noise I might make." "Then get louder," Jeb replied. So she did. They rode from town to town, meeting with ranchers who'd lost everything in the land rush, families driven off their plots by forged deeds and crooked judges. Clara brought proof: her father's journals, ledgers, the verified map. Jeb brought presents. When he walked into a saloon, the room fell silent. He wasn't just a rich man now. He was the man standing beside Clara Vanderholt. Together they became legend. But legend brought enemies. One morning, as they crossed Dry Fork Bridge, gunshots cracked the still air. Clara ducked instinctively, but Jeb took the hit, shoulder clean through. He stayed upright, guiding the horse until they reached cover. "You're bleeding," she cried, hand shaking as she pressed cloth against the wound. "Still breathing," he muttered. "Means they missed the part that matters." They lay low for 3 days in a miner's cabin, Clara tending his wound while watching shadows dance beyond the windows. "You can walk away," Jeb said once, pain thick in his voice. "You've done enough." Clara stared at him like he'd gone mad. "You saved me from dying in the woods. But you gave me something bigger than that. You made me believe I was worth saving. I'm not walking away from the man who gave me back my name." He smiled weakly. "I don't deserve you." "That's not your call," she whispered, kissing his forehead. When he finally stood again, pale but steady, they rode into Carson one last time. This time not as fugitives, but as flames. In the courthouse square, Clara climbed the steps and unrolled a list of names. "These men tried to steal everything," she declared, "but they forgot the land remembers." Her voice carried over the crowd. No bullets, no protests, just silence. Then cheers. The people had heard too many lies. It was time for truth. And this time, they had Clara Vanderholt to speak it, and Jeb Caldwell to guard it with blood if he had to. Spring rolled over the valley like forgiveness, and the land that once burned now bloomed. Clara stood on the porch of the newly built schoolhouse, watching children run barefoot through the grass once stained with blood. "Feels like something new," she whispered. Jeb leaned against the railing beside her, his arm still stiff but healing. "Feels like something earned." Since the deed had gone public and the rail barons retreated, Clara had reclaimed more than property. She'd reclaimed the story. She helped other families recover their stolen lands, filed lawsuits, even started a co-op to keep the smaller ranches alive. But more than that, she became a symbol. The girl who came back from the dead and dared to speak names no one else would. "You ready to stop fighting?" Jeb asked one evening as they watched the sun melt over the ridge. Clara smiled. "But I'm ready to build between the battles." "Then let's build." They started small. Cabins, barns, a post where riders could share news freely. No banks, no overseers, just people planting what was theirs. One night, Jeb took her to the edge of the property. "This here's my favorite patch," he said, pointing to a hill covered in wildflowers. "I used to come here when I couldn't sleep, when I felt like the world was too damn loud." Clara took his hand. "And now?" "Now it's quieter." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small ring. Silver, simple, carved with her family crest and his cattle brand side by side. "You don't need saving," he said, "but maybe we both need a place to come home to." She didn't cry. She smiled, steady, certain. "Then let's go home." They were married beneath that hilltop 2 weeks later. No crowds, just a preacher, a pair of wild horses grazing nearby, and the sky wide with blessing. Clara wore a dress sewn by the widows she'd helped. Jeb wore the same boots he'd used to ride into hell for her, and when they kissed, it wasn't for the crowd. It was for the fire they both carried and the peace they'd finally earned. Together they weren't just rewriting history. They were living the kind that would never be buried again. Years later, children would ask about the woman in the portrait above the fireplace, the one with the wind in her hair and the strength in her eyes. "That's Clara Caldwell," their parents would say. "The girl they found dying in the woods, the one who came back and changed everything." Clara stood on the edge of her land, the deed now framed behind her desk, her fingers brushing the leaves of a new tree she'd planted near the river. It was where she and Jeb had first escaped death, where they'd started living. Jeb approached from behind, older now, but with the same steel in his bones. "They're asking if you'll speak at the state gathering," he said, "about land reform." Clara laughed softly. "I used to hide from people like them. Now they take notes when you talk." "Still strange," she said. "Still right," he replied. That evening, she sat by the fire, reading her father's journal one last time. She didn't cry anymore when she read his words. She smiled, because every line he'd written was now real, and every fight she'd endured had led here, to this home, this land, this life. Later, Jeb found her standing at the doorway, watching the moon rise. "You thinking about the past again?" he asked. "No," she said. "I'm thinking about the girls who'll never be buried like I almost was. Because of you. Because of us." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "I ever tell you how lucky I was to find you out there?" She turned to him, face soft in the firelight. "You didn't find me. You chose to stop. That changed everything." He kissed her then, slow like memory. And when they parted, Clara looked out over the land that once tried to erase her and smiled. "They tried to write me out," she whispered, "but now I'm the one writing the ending." And what an ending it was. A survivor reborn into a builder, a girl left for dead turned into a woman with a voice that moved counties. And beside her, the man who gave her not just safety, but purpose. Together they built a home, not of wood and nails, but of truth. And now it was her name the valley echoed long after the wind stopped moving.